Right. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Jonas, you are head of engineering Platform Lane. For those who didn't memorize all the titles in Shopware, what do you do?
Yeah, so actually I'm responsible for our framework level teams, that is core team, administration team, storefront and composable front ends. So overseeing kind of the frameworks that we provide and all the functionalities that we build for ourselves, but also of course for the community.
Right, so all the functionalities like the B2B suite, search are built on top of those foundational.
Yes, I think when you work with Shopware, you are familiar with the way to extend Shopware, with the plugin system or with the app system, and we work on that foundational stuff.
All right, brilliant. And how do developers' ecosystem interact with that on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, as you know, you interact with it probably by injecting classes into Shopware, overriding our modules for the administration. So you really take what we've built for you, and then, you use it, but also you're kind of limited to the options that we provide for you. And that is kind of the things that we want to change in the long run, and I guess that's why we are here.
Right, so we are beholden to your opinion on technology. And I guess you have a different vision about that, actually.
Yes, that's why we're here talking about it, right? We have a different vision of going more into the direction of platform engineering. And like what that means for us is, well, basically first we should start with kind of the history we had using the term platform inside Shopware. All of you probably know that for a long time we had a repository called Shopware Platform on GitHub. That was kind of the beginning of Shopware 6. But that is not necessarily what we mean with platform engineering. For me, platform engineering is more of the mindset or the mental models that we have inside our engineering organization of providing a better platform to the ecosystem or to ourselves. So with every feature that we build, the goal should be to make it that way that others can build on top of it and can extend it in an easy way. And we can do kind of the heavy lifting, and then everybody profits of that.
All right, all right. And what is the difference between a platform and a product or a code base? Because, like you said, there was a repository on GitHub with a lot of code. It was called a platform. So, what is different?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think the main difference is for a platform, you treat your developers as your first-class customers. So as you treat normal customers, you also have kind of different personas in the different developers. So for example, you have a front-end developer that wants to do a cool theme for the storefront. You have an integration partner that just wants to integrate their ERP system in a really easy way. Or you have hosters that want to set up Shopware. I guess all those personas come together and see Shopware as a platform, and it is about like exactly making all those use cases that those personas have really easy to do and really easy to accomplish.
All right, that's interesting, right? Because let's say days of Shopware 5, we had mostly full stack developers. I think with Shopware 6, we already started to see that there's a split, right? You have maybe more back-end oriented, maybe more front-end oriented. I think with Shopware composable front-ends, now all of a sudden you have more the back-end of the front-end with JavaScript engineers that are maybe a bit more, right, doing the heavy lifting. But I think this is also reflected in our documentation, right? Where you see that if you want to get into Shopware, and I think many of you will recognize that you have to work through a lot of documentation to kind of even just get a grasp of things. And if I have to build an integration, right, as a technology provider, I might not really want to work through all of the documentation. Is that kind of the personas that you are alluding to?
Yes, exactly. Like all those personas have different use cases to the platform. All those have kind of different experiences that they have, and they have different expectations to the platform. So it's really about kind of bringing that all together and tailoring it to their needs so that they have the information and also the possibilities to use the platform in the way they expect it to be.
All right. So you're telling me that we're going to be focusing more on our ecosystem, and we're going to be focusing more on modularity and extensibility. I think I heard this before, a couple of Shopware community days. I think I've heard this a couple of years before. What's changing?
Yes, you might say that like that's nothing new. the open ecosystem that we have, the extensibility, is kind of the main pillars of Shopware success. And of course, like that's true, and we don't want to change that. But what we want to change is that we want to go in a different direction, not just offering kind of this framework approach to extensibility that I thought about, where you extend Shopware by overriding classes, by overriding view components, and with that, like, you are limited to the technology choices that we make. So that's always the case for a framework. We as a framework provider kind of make choices for you, and you have to live with our choices. And also you are really coupled to our framework. But we want to open that up with kind of this platform engineering ideas, so that we give you the opportunity to really do what you do. And when you look at where platform engineering is coming from, like, it was born out of this microservices frenzy. And like, you might think of microservices what you want, but I guess the goal that they should serve is creating autonomous teams, like creating really autonomy between teams that they can go like fast independently of each other. And when we look at like the Shopware community, I guess that's exactly where we're at. Like, we have super many people, super many partners that depend on Shopware, but they should be able to go fast without like being too coupled to us, to our release cycles and so on. And while I think that kind of microservices is not the answer to that, for us, I guess platform engineering that came out of this microservices idea to solve the problems that people have with microservices is super cool for us to look at and try to learn and see what did they do, like what did those smart people come up with, and kind of implement those ideas or try to match those ideas for our ecosystem and for our community.
Right, so I know Miriam is talking about this on the other stage, and we'll have a panel discussion about this later, but Shopware composable frontends may be a good example, right, where in the admin we use Vue.js. Most Shopware developers probably only know Vue.js when we have it over, when we talk about the framework for JavaScript. However, with Shopware composable frontends, you're trying to open this up for React, Svelte, Angular, if someone wants to do that, right? It's more letting front-end developers choose the framework that they want to have, even independent of their colleagues in the same company. So it's just not just independent of Shopware itself, but also within a company, they should have the freedom.
Yes, and I think composable front-ends is really like our first kind of bigger project or bigger thing that is following that mindset. And you can actually see it because like, it has multiple levels to it. And in the default way, when you just want to get started with it, like, we say, okay, use our Nux-based system based on Vue.js, and there you have everything up and running. That is what we call in platform engineering kind of a golden path. So that is the thing that is really easy to get started with. It has all batteries included and up to go. But there's also this concept of escape hatches, and I think it's important to have like both of those things, because escape hatches allow you to kind of go off-road and do your own way. That is what you said, like, but you're used to React, okay, then use React, and you can still use our API client and the stuff that we provide. And it's not too tailored to our specific solution based on Vue.js, or even this one version of Vue, or this one version of PHP, this one version of Symfony. The idea is to offer also this escape hatches.
All right, and so you mentioned something called golden paths. What is that?
A golden path is kind of the default way, or make it easy to get started. And there it's all about like, how do you first interact with the system, and golden path should give you options to do that, or not just options, but it should be kind of a plain script or a thing you can use. You have it up and running, and you can play around with it. And I think in the past, we were really good building extension systems kind of based on escape hatches. So that is basically saying, okay, here you have an extension point, and you can go off-road of what Shopware does, do your own thing. How you do it, we don't care, I don't know. We don't know all your use cases, so you're pretty much on your own. Mm-hmm. But I think what we need to focus more on is really also providing those golden paths. And that means having a blueprint, having a template for those kind of 80% of the use cases. Like, okay, when you use this extension point, normally you would do something like this, so here's the starting point. And then you can use that, and that is For example, one big point in the app system that is kind of still missing and that people are asking a lot is, okay, how do I host my apps? And previously it was like we say, okay, you can do whatever you want. You can write them in Go, you can write them in PHP. Like we can't offer, all that for you. But the idea is to have at least some answer that says, okay, for 80% of the use cases, we think, okay, this is the way you should go. And then you can go in that direction, get started with it. And if you later find out that you want to use Go, like you can switch over.
Okay, all right, so that makes sense. It's a bit less opinionated. We still give you best practices. And instead of, for example, what I hear often, especially with the app system, is I want to have hooks everywhere in the system, right? So I can extend everything. So that is then an anti-pattern that you're saying we should have a better approach to.
Yes, the anti-pattern would be to rely then on so many internals again that you're too tightly coupled, because like we see that over and over again with Shopware updates becoming a hassle for plugin manufacturers because they are so tightly coupled. And so we kind of need to rethink our approach to extendability a bit and say, okay, how can we make kind of the extension still possible, but in a more decoupled way?
All right. What are some of the benefits on a day-to-day basis for me when I work with a platform engineering product?
On the day-to-day basis, I think it all boils down to, for you as a developer, it should be the developer experience, like your day-to-day experience that you have working with Shopware. So there should be like less frustrations. You should be faster to do your job. And in the end, like for your employer, also for the merchants that are paying you to do stuff, should be like increased developer productivity. That is the main goal. Like you should be faster at your job and better at your job, because kind of we provide the platform for you to do the things, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time at every customer project, but you can build on top of the platforms that we provide for you.
All right, and making my job easier, that's not just documentation, right? That's not just having recipes out there or what have you. That is also some concrete code, let's say. Can you name some examples from the last year, something that you released that was specifically based on golden paths or what have you in the product?
Yeah, sure. And I think we already we already talked about composable front ends. I guess that's one obvious example. The other one is maybe also the stock handling that we completely changed for Shopware 6.6, because like previously we had a pretty complicated stock handling and we put a lot of thoughts into it and how it should work for the majority of the use cases, but then it was super hard to disable it or to do your own. What we changed now was to make it way more easier to integrate kind of your own logic to it, to completely switch off the Shopware calculations, so you can actually provide, or we provided a better interface for you to completely change how we think about that. But also, I think the next cool thing is all the stuff that we do around Meteor, and that is like more focusing on the administration side of things. But Meteor is kind of our design library, our component library, and our extension SDK that we provide under the name Meteor. And there, the idea is to give designers, but also your developers, kind of a reference how kind of Shopware admin modules or components look like, and so you can reuse it every time. Like we use it at the core, you can use it in your plugins, you can use it in your apps, and you always have the same kind of UI for it. And the cool point is when you use it together with the extension SDK, like you are in control of what version of our component library do you use. Again, also looking at the 6.6 major update where we made the View 3 changes, as the View 3 upgrade, a lot of plugins, there was a lot of hassle to do the update from View 2 to View 3 in your plugins. When you now use the component library with the extension SDK, you pin the version of the component library. And when the component library is running on View 2, you are on that version of the component library. Like you don't have to change, you are in control of the change cycle. And we do a release and we switch to a new version of the component library that uses View 3 under the hood. That does not mean that you need to do that at exactly the same timeline. But again, it's we provide you another version of that thing that's running on the latest Vue version.
Yeah.
Probably at some point in time you want to use it and you do the switch, but it's not forced on the timeline set by us, but by you or by your client.
Yeah. I think another example that comes to mind is, I think earlier last year, we, with the move to the US, right, the US market, we all of a sudden had to handle text jars, striped text, right, and that was very hard coded, the way we handled text, and I think also for there, we introduced a lot of change to kind of facilitate that, make it less opinionated, right?
Exactly, and make it easier to allow those kind of things and to allow kind of a escape hatch to, it's for me it's similar to what we did with the stock handling. Like we have a default way of how to do things. If you don't want, if the default way doesn't suit you, for example, tax calculations in the US, it's way more complicated, then use a separate service that's specifically for that.
Yeah, and it's not just features, right? It's also tooling. So I know Sonar will be talking later on Shopware command line interface tool, I think. Tooling is an important part of this as well.
Yes, and especially there it's like, again, tailored to the different developer personas that you have. For example, the Shopware CLI, it's kind of the tool that we have to make how you interact with Shopware and how to host or operate Shopware, way easier, and also give you our kind of best practices and our opinions on how you should operate Shopware. Not say, okay, here's the software, we don't care how you deploy it, we don't care how you run it, but actually like give you ideas how we think you should be operating it.
Yeah, and the last one that comes to mind, I think that that our Vietnamese colleagues are talking about, is the SaaS sandboxes, right? To test your apps actually in the cloud before you kind of needed to test it on-prem, which was rather awkward, I think.
Yes, I think the developer sandboxes for SaaS that we just launched are one example of it, but also the local developer environment with DevEnv that we have standardized, that's also super easy to spin up on your local machine, regardless of whether you're running Windows, Mac, or Linux. It just works the same. And as you said, Quinn and Num, I will be talking about that later and go into details, and also go into details of what we already did as changes to the developer documentation, for example. So don't miss that talk.
All right, cool. We talked about what we launched this year. What can we expect next year?
One thing Daniel already hinted at in the keynote, and that was the Shopware operator for Kubernetes. And that is also one of the things where we said before, like, okay, we write software, we don't care how to run it or how to deploy it, but we see the need for way more flexible kind of deployments. And when you look at it, coming from Shopware 5, we did a whole rewrite for Shopware 6, but the way you deploy and you operate Shopware basically hasn't changed. And a lot of the deployment scripts, or in general, kind of the system architecture for Shopware 6 can look the same as it did before with Shopware 5. But now we see with all the tooling that is coming around, around Kubernetes, it gets really, really powerful to spin up way more dynamic environments where it's way easier to get in new services that you need for search or what have you. And there kind of the operator comes in and is kind of our best practice again of how to use Shopware in such an environment.
Right, so FTPing into 8 Kubernetes containers is not really feasible, and that's why we kind of need to do it in the pipeline. Okay, makes sense. What else? App system?
Yes, we already touched on the app system a bit, and I guess, of course, like we will continue refining it, and based on the ideas we said with platform engineering, I think there will be kind of a shift to use the app system in ways where the app system is really good at and where it's designed to be good at. In the past, we used a lot of the stuff to make it more similar to the plugin system, and everybody said like, okay, but why should I don't use plugins? Yes, exactly. We have a pretty good plugin system, and with this framework thinking, I guess that's really good. And like you can't, the app system can't compete on that level, but on the other level of being more decoupled. And so the main idea is to really strengthen the strengths of the app system. And for me, that is again when you yeah, go at it from kind of the theoretical perspective. Apps are more kind of a standalone service, or you can call that microservices, just to use the buzzword. But the main point of that is to be able to independently kind of deploy, run, and operate your services. When you look at how the app system is right now, what you need to do is you have your app running on some external system, and you have this zip file that you need to distribute to the stores, so it's not like independently deployable, and so it's just a pain in the ass. So the idea is to make it really useful in a way that you are in full control of the whole life cycle of your app, and you can just deploy changes and they are live in an instant. And we are going step by step in that direction. And that does not mean that like there will be a whole new version of the app system, and like all apps that are out there, you know, you can remove them and write them again. It's, I guess, it's a gradual progress and incremental progress towards, making it just easier to use apps, and then also, of course, kind of SDKs and deployment blueprints come into mind.
Yeah, I think a very interesting approach was taken by Matteo from Vodka Agency that he's talking about later on in the day, where he deploys it actually from his React project base. Yeah, thank you for giving more insight in this new approach or this new strategy for Shopware on developing the platform. It was interesting. We're looking forward to what is coming out in the next year. Thank you.
Thank you.